Welcome to Manhwa Recaps, spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. Hey guys, before the video begins, if you want to support the channel, please subscribe since a lot of you aren't. Or if you don't like subscribing, leave a like or a comment. Sorry for the interruption. We see a man saying he won, while we see a game with a clear screen. The man is excited he finally beat the game, and we see his chatters are excited too. We learn the game is called Protect the Empire, a tower defense and dungeon offense hybrid game. And after 10 years, he's been the only person to win the game. He talks to his chat, and tells them no matter how difficult a game is, he will beat it. The man is a streamer named Retro Taku who specializes in high difficulty retro games. He receives a chatter mentioning the death of the saint, and Retro Taku mentions how the viewers bonded with the characters, and wished everyone would live through the final battle, but everyone except the main character Lucas, died. But his goal wasn't a no-death run, but just to complete it. He mentions how even after the game was beaten, Lucas just stands still over the final boss's corpse, on top of the corpses of monsters, and allies alike. He says even though it's a game, Lucas looks so lonely standing there. It shows the end screen, and one of the chatters says, the dev should reward him because he beat the game when everyone else complained about the difficulty of the game. Taku says he doesn't need anything like that, it's fine because he had fun. And the chatters mock him for faking being modest. Taku mentions how their website's already been taken down, and there's no sequel to the game. So there's no way they'd reach out to him. But he receives a notification from the developer of the game, and he is surprised. All of his chatters are surprised, and the developer says first, you have my gratitude, because he thought nobody would succeed, but I'm relieved after seeing you beat the game, and I'm happy there's still hope for us. This confuses Taku, and he wonders if they're making a sequel. The developer then says, you've proven your skills, so come to this place and help us. Taku wonders if this is a scam, because there's no way the developer would have come to his stream in the first place, and decides to kick the man out of his stream. He says Mr. so-called developer, but is interrupted by his screen distorting, and everything goes blurry for Taku. He wonders what's happening and falls unconscious, wondering if played for too long. The screen thanks him for playing, and it shows some giant things crashing, creating a loud noise. This wakes up Taku, and he screams, wondering what the noise was. He sees in front of him a wall has been melted by some acid, and he screams, wondering what is going on. The debris begins to fall, and he cowers on the floor. He's overwhelmed by the smell of gunpowder, and is shocked when a cannon fires in front of him. He looks around and sees a flag, and an army of soldiers, and that he's on top of a castle wall. After seeing all of this, he wonders what's going on again, and wonders if he's in the middle of a war. One of the soldiers notices he's awake, and they rush to him, saying, Your Majesty, are you alright? This scares Taku, and he crawls backward, thinking it's an enemy, and yelling to stay back. The soldier drops his weapon and gets on his hands and knees, apologizing, and asking for him to spare his life. Taku wonders what the hell is wrong with the man, and as he tells him to calm down, he sees a giant acid ball being hurled at him. It lands on the man, knocking Taku onto the floor. He struggles to lift himself up, and when Taku looks over, he sees people being melted and screaming. Another soldier yells out, saying the stormtroopers are coming close, and to prevent them from climbing up. One of the men instantly dies, and we see his impaled corpse get flung over the wall. The man's arm gets sent flying, and lands in front of Taku, splashing him in blood, which forces the situation to sink in as reality. He witnesses more soldiers being impaled, their lifeless bodies just drop to the floor. And Taku wonders what's going on beyond the wall, and he sees a spider monster climb over and begins to crawl at him. Some soldiers notice this and try to help, but are instantly killed, paralyzing Taku with fear. He wonders if it's a dream as the spider approaches him, because the situation makes no sense to him. The monster slashes down at him, and Taku thinks dying like this doesn't make any sense. But a man with blonde hair appears, and tells him, Your Highness, being in denial is such a boring response. And we see the man pulls out his sword, and imbues it with aura, and instantly kills the spider. He asks Taku if he's okay, and asks if he's hurt. Taku says he looks familiar, and recognizes him as Lucas. Lucas says it seems he's hurt his head, but he's glad because he finally called him by his name, and mentions how he's never called him by his name before. Taku wonders if it's really Lucas, and realizes that would mean he's inside of the game he just beat while streaming. As he looks at the battlefield, he realizes he is fucked, because of how difficult the game is. He sees an entire army of spiders swarming at him, and he is utterly shocked. It shows the spiders shooting acid balls bombarding the walls, and Taku wonders why he entered the game. Lucas grabs Taku and tells him the enemies are called the Black Spider Army, and that they don't move after sunset. And even though the front wall is about to collapse, they just need to hold on until then. Taku wonders why Lucas is protecting him, and wonders who he is in-game. It cuts to sunset, and we see soldiers being carried out, and treated. Lucas begins to talk to Taku as he overlooks the spiders' corpses beneath him, and Taku asks him when and where they are currently. Lucas tells him the year, and that they are at Fortress City, also known as the front base of Crossroad. Taku remembers what tomorrow will be, as it's a familiar date and location. And reveals that it's actually the tutorial of the game and that he must be called Ash. He asks Lucas if that's his name, and once he says yes, he becomes scared. Taku explains that he's the third crown prince of the Empire, and the worst commander, and that in the tutorial, he met the worst ending. His full name is Ash Bonehatter Everblack. Taku explains again that he's the only person to have cleared the hardest difficulty, which combines Hell and Sage modes together. Sage mode just autosaves, so you can't go back. And that the tutorial is an impossible stage, that was made to never be beaten, and that the story starts with Lucas escaping alone. And the Black Spider Army appears later in the game, so how is he expected to kill them at the start? He slaps himself and says that he's cleared it before, and if he uses all of his knowledge, there has to be a way, but after hyping himself up, he realizes he's fucked. He can see from the stage info screen that there are thousands of spiders, and they are all high level, and even the wall's durability is low now. The only weapon he can use currently is a cannon, and he begins to think of a solution. He mentions if it's Sage mode, he can't load, so he has to find the best way possible every time. And since he's been playing the game, he's realized there's always an option to survive. And he looks through the info for something to use. He runs out of his room screaming for Lucas, and tells him to call for his escort troop. Lucas asks why, and he tells him he's found a way to break through the situation. We see him sitting down, and begins talking to everyone. He recognizes all of their faces, but he's never seen them live. There's Lily, Ken, and Damien. He asks why Damien is curled up, and they explain he lost a friend. Taku remembers that from the start, Damien was debuffed, and even if he's an important healer, he wasn't useful. He changes the topic and tells everyone what their roles are. He explains Lily is a fire mage, but he gives her the position of tank. This confuses her, and he tells Ken, who is actually a tank, that he's going to infiltrate the enemy camp, and tells Damien he'll be their sniper, and he orders Lucas to maintain the front line. Ken yells and asks if he's taking this seriously, but he understands that it sounds like a crazy plan. But explains that this stage is impossible to clear with normal means, but he has to use crazy means. He glares at Ken and asks if he's disobeying him, the son of the Emperor, and the Supreme Commander. Everyone looks tense, and Ken is visibly scared. Taku stands up and pulls out his blade, stabbing Lily in the shoulder. And mentions how while he's in Ash's body, he has to be crazier. Ken thinks to himself that the prince is a complete lunatic, and there's no way they can trust him. We see the knife inside of Lily's shoulder begin to catch flame, and everyone is shocked. And Taku explains that the tutorial characters have a hidden specialty that contrasts with their role, because it was put in as a joke. Taku asks Lily if she was cut by metal before by some goblins, and after that, she gained fiery skin. Taku explains that it changes the body to flames to avoid physical attacks, and as long as she has mana, she can avoid attacks, and asks her if he's wrong. He explains how in the game, you can't use her quality, but this isn't a game. And for an impossible stage, there's no choice but for him to cheat. And he curses whoever sent him here. He apologizes to Lily for stabbing her, and she asks how he knew about it. He tells her it isn't important, and he calls Ken's name out. And he explains Ken was a thief when he was younger, and Ken asks how he knew. Taku says how he knows isn't important, and it's about what he can do because of it. Taku explains that he can conceal himself whenever he wants, and nobody will notice him. Ken stays silent, and Taku threatens him with a knife, and Ken says he can do it. He puts the knife down and approaches Damien. He explains he's the most important piece, and asks Damien about his eyes, and explains that's why he can remember his friend's death so well. Damien recalls his friend's death, and begins to cry. Asking why he was brought here, asking if there was some noble goal, or if their lives are nothing but entertainment. Taku tells him to resent him, but his friend gave his life to save him, and asks if he's just going to waste it, and that he needs to take revenge. Kill the spider, then take revenge on Ash. He asks Damien if he wants to kill the spiders, and he says yes, and he asks if he wants to kill him too, and Damien says yes. Taku says good, and promises if he gets out of this alive, he'll die by his hands. Lucas yells, and Taku says if the plan fails, they all die anyway, but he promises to die by Damien's hands, and gives him his word, so at least for tomorrow, just follow his orders. Taku explains that he'll use Damien's resentment toward him as fuel. And he tells them he won't make excuses, and due to his judgment, the army is on the brink of annihilation, but if they stick to his plans, they can drive the monsters out and will win. So just this once, follow and trust him. And we see them all looking determined. It cuts to the next day, and they are atop the walls preparing for the Black Spider army. The soldiers bang the drums to notify everyone, and we see Taku beside a cannon. And the spider army begins to rush in, and he explains the plan. While the members buy time, he'll find the queen, and after that, they'll shoot her with the mana cannon. But the problem is the location. She orders the army from far away, so it's not visible to normal people, and he wonders if it's possible. And he opens a window while grinning, saying it is. We see a giant blue barrier extend outward from the castle, and it's revealed to be Ash's unique skill. It's the ability to view the area in minimap form. And he was surprised by the weak stats, but is happy he's got this skill at least. He looks at the minimap to find where the boss is, but is surprised it isn't on the map. It cuts to Taku giving Ken stamina potions, and Ken preparing to leave the gate. And we see Lily scared, waiting inside of her spot. And Lucas commanding the troops. He sees Taku's oh shit face, and mistakes it as him being ready, so he orders the soldiers to fire. We see them kill some spiders, and Lucas gives him a thumbs up. Taku focuses up to try to find the boss, and realizes she has to be in the back. He sees the rear group on the minimap, and asks Damien if he can see them. He asks if he can spot the queen, and Damien focuses and describes the queen. Taku gets the cannon in position, and he orders Damien to hold the cannon. Damien is scared, but Taku tells him it's okay to miss. And that he'll take responsibility. Taku says that all Damien has to do is pull the trigger and avenge his friend. Damien pulls the lever, and we see the cannon charge up and fire. We see a massive beam of mana launch from the cannon, and we see the ball fly over the enemy army toward the rear. And we see a giant explosion, and the soldiers say the target was hit. They compliment Damien, and we learn Damien has a trait that means he can never miss. Taku notices the monsters are still moving, and he grabs a monocular, and he spots the queen being protected by the spiders. We see her let out a scream, and the spiders begin to change their tactic, and begin to zerg where Lily is. It cuts to Ken hiding behind a tree with only one stamina potion left, and the spider army is running past him, and he wonders if he should run away. It cuts back to Damien saying it's been a direct hit, and the queen is still alive after taking a cannon shot. Taku explains how the spider queen is generally pretty weak individually, but the tutorial stage queen is different. He has no information about her, and wonders if she has an unkillable status. One of the soldiers yells about how the cannon is reaching its limit, so it only has a few shots left, 3 to be exact. This heavily worries Taku, and he understands killing it with 3 shots isn't possible. And that Damien's eyes are being strained, and wonders if Damien will last. One of the soldiers yells that a demolisher is coming, and we see a giant spider crab rushing toward the already damaged wall. Taku yells for everyone to focus it, but it has no effect, and the wall gets smashed through by Chungus. We see the rest of the spiders run through after the demolisher, and Lucas and Taku give everyone their orders. Taku tells them they have to kill the queen, and we see Damien launch another attack, visibly straining his eyes. It cuts to Lucas holding his ground against the spider army, saying they must defend Taku. And Taku begins to get frightened as he watches the soldiers die, and the death count begins to climb. He wasn't aware when he was playing it as a game, but actually hearing the screams of the soldiers makes the reality sink in. He begins to panic and cannot think of a way out. We see Ken screaming to draw the spiders' attention, and he runs away while they follow him. He hides behind a rock and activates his stealth, but he doesn't have the health required for it, and is surrounded by the spiders. We see them tear him to pieces. F in the comments for Ken. Taku realizes his lapse of judgment is what cost Ken his life. Not only Ken, but everyone else is losing their lives because of him. And how in game he always used sacrifices to get what he needed, because that's how the game is. But now he understands the weight of his actions. And he angrily yells at the spiders, but he knows they won't stop because of a scream. He sees Lucas killing one of the giant spiders, and Taku realizes that the only way to stop the monsters is by killing them. One of the soldiers tells him the fourth shot is ready, and Taku asks Damien if he's ready, and we see Damien is bleeding from his eyes, but says yes. They shoot the shot, and we watch it hurl toward the queen, hitting her directly as she screams, but it isn't enough to kill her. They fall to their knees, realizing the attacks aren't working, and because they only have one shot left. Taku wonders if this is truly the end, even though the cannon is about to break, and the front line is broken. Damien can't open his eyes, and he wonders if there's any hope. One of the soldiers yells out that she's definitely been damaged, and he admires the scout for being loyal to his role. And the scout says one more shot can kill it, but an acid rock hits the scout. Lucas screams out for Taku, and we see him falling from the tower because it's been broken. He blacks out, but is woken up by a light. This light is revealed to be Lucas blocking debris for him. Lucas asks if he's okay, and begins to puke up blood. Lucas asks if he remembers, and says it's been 20 years since then. But Taku doesn't know what he's talking about because he's not really Ash. Lucas mentions how on his first day as his bodyguard, he spoke to him, and said he can't become the emperor, but he will become the greatest man in the world. So Lucas must become the best knight in the world. Lucas mentions that those words deeply motivated him, and he tells Taku he believes in him. And he falls under the weight of the rubble. Taku pulls his unconscious body out, and tells him to hang on, because he's the hero, so he cannot afford to die here. He begins to analyze the situation, and he sees Damien and the other soldiers beside the cannon. And he wonders how they are still alive, and where the spiders are. He hears Lily calling for him. As she holds back the spiders, she tells him it isn't over yet, and we see she is impaled by the spiders. Taku yells out to her, and she says she can't hold out for much longer. She says soon, the monsters will break through, and we don't have time, so hurry. She says don't make my death worthless. Taku yells out for them to prepare the next shot, but one of the soldiers says that the cannon has surpassed its limit. And if it shoots, then it will explode. Taku says it's better for them to roll the dice even if they die in flames. The soldier asks how he plans to aim because they can't see outside, and that the cannon stand is gone. Taku says they'll hold the cannon with their hands, and there's no need to aim, they just need Damien to shoot. Taku approaches Damien, and tells him this is the last time he needs to shoot, and to please push himself once more. Damien says no matter what he does, nothing changes, and asks what the point is. Taku says if they hit it again, it will die, and Damien says that's not what he meant. Even if they kill the queen, then what changes? Because the world always takes things from him, and that he wants to stop. He doesn't want to live like this. Taku interrupts him by yelling his name, asking if he thinks the world is unreasonable, and even if he overcomes an obstacle, would he still be living in hell? Damien says yes, and Taku grabs him by his collar, yelling at him for saying obvious things. And that nothing goes his way either, but that's life. And asks if he's just going to sit and wait to die. And that they have to keep fighting until they die. And that he plans to struggle and fight until the end. He tells Damien if he wants to die so badly, then to kill himself, but if he's too much of a coward, then to become his trigger. He tells him to stop looking for his dead friend, and the only thing he needs to work for his commander, and that he's his chess piece, his key, and that's all he needs him to be. Taku activates his commander skill, and gives Damien an order to blast the monster's face off. Damien says he'll do it, and one of the soldiers says the cannon is loaded. But there's no way to cool the barrel down. Taku tells him to move, and says he'll hold the cannon. The soldier tells him that it's too hot, and it'll be way worse than an average burn. Taku says it's better to die that way. And asks Damien if he's ready. Damien says he can't see or feel his hands, and Taku reassures him it's okay. We see the cannon begin to heat up, and Taku begins to scream in pain from the heat of the cannon. We see him hold it up, and the soldiers begin to help him by grabbing onto the cannon. They all lift it up toward a demolisher, and Taku yells out for Damien. We see Damien's eyes begin to bleed again, and he's ordered to shoot, so he pulls the lever. We see the cannon begin to charge with mana, and it fires off a massive blast of mana. We see the beam propel the ball, and Taku just keeps repeating for it to hit, as he begins to pass out. Taku says it's an impossible task, they had to shoot at an enemy they cannot see, and there's no way it would hit. But we see the ball curve in the air, because it's ignoring the factors that limited the shot, including all of the monsters in the army. Because the shot's target is predetermined. It hits directly with the Spider Queen's face, only leaving a massive explosion behind. Taku begins to remember his first chatter in his stream, and we see he was happy to receive a chat, but didn't remember what he responded with. He opens his eyes, screaming, and we see him bandaged up, surprised he's alive. Lily tells him to rest more because the burn is deep and will take time to heal. She tells him he's slept for 4 days, and she thought he wasn't going to wake up. He's happy when he understands he survived, and she explains the last shot killed the queen, and the army stopped moving instantly. And that they've won. He looks out his window seeing the soldiers moving the dead, and burning spider corpses. Lily explains the injuries he suffered, and that even after he gets healed, he'll still have scars. And he says scars are a cheaper price to pay than losing his life, and he asks Lily how she is, and notices she's in a wheelchair. She explains she ran out of mana, and a spider scratched her back, but now she can't move her lower body. She tells him not to worry, and she's just thankful that she's alive. And she explains the only survivors are 9 people in total, and Taku is visibly upset, and wonders if there was another way, a tactic that he didn't think of for everyone to live. Lily comforts him by telling him he isn't a god, and that there was no way to save everyone. Taku explains from the start he's the one who dragged the soldiers here, and she says that nobody expected the monsters to move in hordes, because they haven't for decades. And he shouldn't be so harsh on himself. Lucas barges into the room, while crying, he yells about how happy he is. He asks him if he's hurt, and that he can bring Damien over. Taku asks if Lucas is okay, and Lucas says his main strength is being tough. Lucas holds up a manifest for all of the soldiers who died, and says there are many he couldn't find the remains of, but they've recovered the ones they could find. Taku asks where they gather the remains, and says that he'll go see him. On his way there, he meets Damien, and is surprised that Damien was healing everyone after what happened, and tells him if he wants, he'll give him the money to retire, and that he can do what he wishes now. Damien mentions how Taku called him his trigger, and Damien says he wants to know the origins of the monster, and why his friend died. So he asks to follow Taku's path. Taku says okay, and to pay respect to the dead, they needed a priest. We see them holding a funeral for the deceased. Taku acknowledges there wasn't a better strategy, and that he chose a plan and executed it. That this is his result, and he will carry the consequences. Taku tells Lucas, after the funeral is over, to recover the remains and transfer them to an empty field in the west part of the crossroad, and to bury them there. He plans to build a cemetery where the memorial facility was in the game. Taku says that every year on the last day of February will be a day they spend honoring their sacrifices. Taku tells Lucas he won't fail twice, and it's time to go back to their headquarters. It cuts to 3 days after, and we see they have a caravan heading toward the main camp. We see Taku inside one of the carriages, extremely bored, but we see he has a job selection available. Taku mentions how after level 5, you get to choose a job. We see his stats have barely gone up, but the interesting thing is that he can choose any job in the game. But one of the classes is one that he's never seen before, and he wonders if it's a hidden class that's a prize for clearing the hardest difficulty. He mentions his skill is useless in the start, and that it's risky to choose a job he doesn't know about. Lucas interrupts him and says they are close to Crossroad, and Taku looks out the carriage window to see a giant fortress wall. He explains it's at the south end of the world, and it's to stop monsters from emerging from the southern area called Black Lake. And it used to be a significant area, but now instead of soldiers, it's run by mercenaries, old soldiers, rookies, and people who've failed in society. And mercenaries were hired regardless of skill level, because the Empire just needed a meat shield. But after the constant development of commercial buildings, the area has caused people to refer to the fortress as Fortress City. We see Taku's carriage go down the main city street, but he realizes the atmosphere is horrible. He understands that after so many people died, they're going to view him poorly, but he's prepared something for this. The residents see a cart full of magic gems, and Taku explains how, right now, their trust in him is 0, but he knows how to get them to like him. And that is by abusing money, to buy their trust. They arrive at the Lord's Manor, and Taku is surprised by how big the house is. One of the attendants bursts out of the door. While yelling, he runs up to Taku and says he was very worried about him. Taku explains the man is named Ader, and that he's an NPC that manages the city, and handles administrative tasks. They head inside, and Ader says he's prepared the bath, and dinner for him. Taku tells Lucas to go rest, and Ader guides him to the bath. Ader says once he's in the water, his fatigue will wash away. Taku thanks him, and says he can go rest, but Ader tells him he is incredible, and calls him Retro Taku. Ader says it was beyond his imagination that he'd be able to clear the tutorial. Taku gets angry, and Ader reveals himself to be the director of the game. Taku punches him. Taku is angry because Ader is the one who brought him here, and Ader immediately begins to apologize by saying the world needs him. But is interrupted by Taku jumping at him, and it cuts to Ader with his hands in the air apologizing. Taku asks why he brought him here. Ader explains that there's a true ending, that nobody has reached. And that he's reset the world countless times trying to reach that ending, but he's never been able to get the one he's wanted. And that he's changed the world's form to that of a game, so people from other worlds could try. But still, even with this, nobody was able to reach the true ending. He says even though Taku didn't finish the ending he wanted, he was still able to accomplish something nobody else could. And he concluded that Taku would have the greatest chance, so that's why he brought him here. Taku begins to yell at him, because he kidnapped him and put him in the tutorial of all places. Ader says it was a bug, but if he achieves the true ending, he will fulfill one wish for Taku. Taku says, what in the Dragon Ball? Ader says he's akin to a god in this world, so it's obvious when Taku returns to his world, he'll give him a gift. Taku asks if it can be anything, like 10 billion, and Ader says he can do way more than that. Taku says that it's enticing, because there's one wish he really wants to see succeed. Ader mentions that he knows there's a wish Taku wants, one that he thought was impossible. Taku realizes now Ader brought him here, knowing who he was, and what he regrets. Ader says he'll fulfill the wish, as long as that wish lives on in Taku's heart, he can fulfill the wish. Taku says if he has this power, why doesn't he just use it to solve this? Ader explains there are restrictions, and in this world, he's a normal human. Taku asks what happens if he dies here, and Ader says he just dies, and life is a one-coin game. And that he could send him back to Earth right now if he wanted, and his first plan was to bring him here and ask first, but there was an issue. He tells him between choosing for a chance at getting his wish granted, or returning and live peacefully. Taku says normally, he'd have gone back instantly, but two things are stopping him. One is the desire for his wish, and the second was confidence. He cleared the game's hardest mode already, so clearing it one more time is nothing. He agrees to staying, and he asks Ader to support him. He tells Ader to sell all the gems by tomorrow, but Ader says he can't, and Taku tells him to listen to him. Ader says he understands, but asks what he's doing with the money. Taku goes to the mercenary guild for gacha, and decides to start light with 100 pulls. Taku kicks the door open, and people yell at him, but he yells back. He asks if they want to die, and people begin to recognize him as the lunatic prince. Taku explains the mercenary guild is where you go to pull characters, and their impact varies with rank. He looks around for anyone glowing, and spots an old lady smoking at the bar. He's excited to see an SR, he sits down asking what her name is. She says her name is Jupiter, and he recognizes her as the lightning sorcerer. He questions where her uniform is from, and she says it's an old model from their empire. She explains that she was the captain of the 2nd Sorcerer Squadron, and, since retiring, has been living as a mercenary. She asks him why he's there, and says he's there to hire some mercenaries. She asks if he's there to buy bait that'll die in his place, and says the rumors of their battle have already spread here, and it's true everyone there is a low life. They don't want to be thrown away by a newbie commander. He says he understands, but they are there to sell their lives anyways, and that her statement is weird, even though her career history is flashy. She was fired because she stole military funds, and how she was caught smuggling goods too and dishonorably discharged. Yet she's still proudly wearing her uniform, and calls her shameless. Taku explains how she's corrupt to her core, but her combat ability is outstanding. Even though she's more like a pirate than a soldier, she's still the lightning sorcerer. Jupiter says even if it didn't end well, she still has pride as a soldier of the Empire, but Taku interrupts her by asking how much. She doesn't answer, and he asks how much does it cost to make her a hunting dog. She says it would cost at least 100,000, and Taku interrupts her by saying 200,000. Even though it's a high price to pay, he's the prince, and he just sold all the gems. And that if he had the chance to buy an SR rank, he'd pay any price. Taku tells everyone he'll pay twice their original salary, and to come to the empty field west of Crossroad this evening. He then leaves and goes to the church. We see the saint has healed him, and that she's an R rank healer. And that he can recruit her later, but that's not why he's there today. He pulls out a sack of gold, and we see the saintess has brought everyone who is free, and they head out. It cuts to the field west of Crossroad, and they are holding a more proper funeral for the fallen soldiers, and in the city, death is common, so this is rare for people to see, and that they've given the soldiers' families compensation, which has spread around the town. Taku explains that it's a show, but it's reasonable, because their fighting needs to be known as a mission of humanity, and Taku introduces himself to everyone, and he says everyone will die. Every week new graves will be made, and their deaths are more expensive than their survival. Taku explains how half of his fees have already been spent for compensation, and that's why he'll do his best to keep everyone alive. His speech ends, and he wonders what everyone thought of it. He doesn't care what they think of him, but he will prove his point in the future. After the funeral, he goes to the backyard of the mansion, and it shows Taku and Lucas standing there, and Taku activates a teleport gate. The rocks form a portal, and when Lucas asks what it is, Taku says it's a gate to the enemy base. Taku restates the game name, and brings up the dungeon offense part, how when the monsters aren't attacking Crossroad, you're meant to explore the dungeon under the lake, and it's called free exploration. And this swapping is the basics of the game. Taku explains how this is a very good start. Sure, it was rough, but now he has a cheat character like Damien, an SR mage, and a lot of money. Taku explains the rules to Lucas, and how they are scouting the enemy. Lucas easily agrees and says he's ready, and Taku is just confused, and thinks it's weird that Lucas isn't asking any questions. Taku asks if he has anything to ask him, and Lucas says he has no questions. He's his sword and shield, and only follows his orders. Taku asks if he's ready to enter, and they go in. They arrive at the lake, and we learn that the Black Lake is the source of the monsters, and is a hell that creates nightmares. They see bubbles form in the lake, and it splits open, and we see ghastly armors begin to crawl out of the floor. Taku calls them living armor, and Taku explains that it didn't matter who he got for stage 1. Out of all of the different monster types, the only one he wanted to avoid was these guys. And he is annoyed by his luck. The enemy screen updates, and we learn there are 1,000 of them. As Taku looks at the army of living armor, he says he's fucked. Taku explains that he reset the game 741 times, for many different reasons, but one main reason was any time he would get living armor early. Living armor is just armor with specters inside of them, and thus, are extremely resistant to physical attack. And they become easier to fight later on when you have more equipment. They head back, and Taku begins yelling for Ader. Taku asks him what the state of the military power is, and Ader says there are only 500 soldiers. Ader explains they can't hire any more from the city, and Taku says to branch out to other cities and offer double their salary, and to ask the Imperial Palace for reinforcements too. Ader asks if it's okay to do that, and Taku explains how, later on, there will be a bad event because they are asking the Imperial Palace for help. Taku tells him it's okay, just to ask them, and to call for carpenters, alchemists, etc., or rather just draft them. Ader says it'll cause an issue, and Taku gets angry and tells him the city is about to fall, and to just bring them all. Taku goes back to his room, and explains the difficulty level isn't normal right now, and we see him select beginner commander as his occupation. The window pops some confetti and congratulates him, and Taku begins to feel a tightness in his chest, and learns he has received a 50% debuff in stat gain. Taku looks dumbfounded, and screams. He grabs the window and continues yelling at it, and then sees a lot of traits appear and wonders what they are. He learns that just by standing on the battlefield, he will buff the soldiers, and that he can form party synergies, and for a gamer like himself, this is the perfect occupation. The next day he asks Ader to explain where everyone is, and Ader says nobody answered, but he brought the leaders in a hurry. We see them tied up, and Taku says this is just surprise adoption. The leaders begin to yell, and Taku asks if they want to die, and asks where they think they are, and don't they know who he is? He says as the Lord, they hurt his feelings. They apologize, and afterward negotiations ran smoothly. Taku offers them a percentage of the magic gems, and some other stuff and asks if it's a good deal. They agree to the deal, Taku tells everyone about the living armor, and they all share a shocked expression. Taku tells them he'll give them all their orders. Lucas will be the commander of the military, and Lily tries to get out by saying she's in a wheelchair, and Taku says she won't be at the front lines. Jupiter asks if she does well, will she get paid more? And we learn she has this trait in game 2, Taku says, of course. And she's assigned as the leader of the detached force. Ader gives Damien a crossbow, and he's assigned the position of sniper again. Taku asks Damien where his glasses are, and Damien explains he only wore them because he wanted to worsen his eyesight, and now his eyes are needed, so he's not wearing them anymore. Ader makes a joke saying he's relieved there's not another glasses character. Taku tells him to shut up. After the meeting ended, it cuts to Taku at the wall, and the union leaders explain that the wall is in poor condition. Taku asks Ader why he didn't take care of the wall, and Ader explains there wasn't enough money, and due to no monsters, the city lord decreased their budget. Taku tells the union leaders it doesn't matter how much it costs, but to repair and reinforce the wall so it will last. He heads to the carpenter's workshop, and orders them to make walls, and the man says that the monsters will easily break them. Taku explains they aren't to block the monsters, and to just do as he says and make the walls tall and sturdy, just make walls. In awe of his beautiful words, they are speechless. He tells them to get started. Over the next 2 days, preparations continued smoothly for everyone. It cuts to the day of the stage, and one of the soldiers spots the armor coming toward them. They beat the drums to alert everyone, and we see a massive army running toward the walls. Taku yells and says don't be afraid, they are small fry. But instantly, in his head says they aren't, and are the worst army to handle in the first half of the game. Taku yells that the soldiers are the strongest part of the empire, and then double takes in his head again, saying they are just a ragtag group. And continues saying the magic is well prepared, and the equipment is in good condition. Again double takes just to flame it all again. He continues yelling to the soldiers, bluffing that it'll be an easy win, and tonight they'll be toasting for their victory. Taku stares at the armor, and we see a giant storm forming above them, and he says it's up to Jupiter, and it shows she's ready to farm some kills. Taku explains all monsters have one goal, to kill the human in front of them. If there aren't any obstacles, they'll move to the closest human, and this makes it obvious to predict how they'll move. So traps work well. We see a bunch of the enemies falling into a pit, after Jupiter baiting them. And we see lightning form in the sky, and Jupiter begins to hold a yellow lightning ball in her hands. We see throw the giant ball down into the trench, and giant lightning strikes begin to spread between the mobs. Jupiter yells at them to learn respect, and we see blue lightning form around her, and she throws it down into the pit and fries the armor. Taku is pleased by Jupiter's skill, and even if she killed 50, there are 1,000 of them. Taku yells for her to retreat, and we see her leading the army back to the main wall. Taku yells it's going as planned, and to just listen to what he says to do. We see Juptir and her squad run past the wooden walls. We see the soldiers begin to follow and are in the middle of the wooden walls. Taku looks pleased, and says now it's their turn. And wonders if they'll avoid or destroy the walls, and their choice is obviously going to be just killing the human in front of them. They begin to bottleneck through the walls, and Taku explains that he set the walls up specifically to form a bottleneck, and orders his men to shoot. We see the cannons fire from the wall, and cannonballs begin to rain onto the enemies. We see explosions from the impacts, and parts of the armor begin to fly around, and it's making small dents in the army's size. Taku explains that this is called the kill zone, and yells for everyone to continue firing. Damien says, if it keeps going like this won't it be enough? Taku says no, and we see some of the enemies begin to form a shield wall. Taku knew things wouldn't be this easy, and prepared in advance. He calls for Lily, and she activates a gravity field artifact, and we see a giant purple sphere form around the shield wall and forces them to their knees. Taku orders Lucas to get the ballistas fired, and we see the giant arrows shoot toward the enemies, and we see them piercing their shields and armor easily. Taku says the plan is going as intended, and one of the soldiers come up yelling that some of the enemies have gone around the walls, and we see some of the army flooding out from the side of the walls. Taku yells out to Jupiter, and tells her to take care of the enemies on the right side of the wall. She heads out, and we see she starts blasting. Taku tells Damien it's his turn, and to shoot the enemies on the left side. We see Damien's eyes glow, and he shoots his crossbow, instantly killing one of the enemies. Taku recaps the kill zone, and the right and left sides. Taku watches the kill count climb, and is happy things are going well, but notices that the specters inside of the armor are flying into the sky. We see them forming a giant blue orb in the air, and once the kill count hits 500. We see a face form in the sky, and Taku explains that it's the Spectre Knight, and it's the boss of the enemy army. Taku explains that this is why the enemies are so rough, because in the second phase, once all the mobs are dead, and wonders why it's appeared even though the enemies are still alive. The boss hasn't moved at all, nor done anything, besides hovering. Taku explains that this is reality, and just the boss's presence is making the soldiers panic. That they are all afraid of facing a giant being, and just the appearance of the boss is weak in the front line, and not only the humans will be scared. It shows Jupiter being bucked off her horse, and she hits her head and is bleeding. The enemies begin to approach her. Jupiter's squad makes a formation around her. Lucas tells Taku they need to turn the cannons toward Jupiter to support her, and Taku tells him no. That if they lose the kill zone, more enemies will leak out. And to focus on restoring the kill zone, and he apologizes, telling Jupiter to hold on. It cuts to Jupiter waking up, and she sees her squad defending her, and when one of the squad members tells her they just need to wait for a rescue squad, he is attacked, but he dodges and hits the Spectre. Jupiter tries to tell him to run, and we see a spear pierce his chest, and when he turns around, he sees a crawling enemy was the one who stabbed him. The surrounding enemies take advantage of him, turning around and killing the man. This angers Jupiter, but she can't control her magic. She watches as another squad member is murdered in front of her eyes, and another squad member tries to run away, but an enemy throws a spear at him, and kills him too. This angers Jupiter even further, and she yells at them and casts a spell on the nearby enemies, frying some of them. But she comments how it was less than a quarter of her normal output. She yells for the last squad member to run away, and that he'll buy her time with magic, so just run away. The boy says he cannot run, and this is the best he can do. A mercenary's second rule of survival is to stay beside the sorcerer. The boy didn't kill the armor, but knocked them down. Damien offered support from the wall, but by the time Jupiter recovered enough magic power for a spell, the member was impaled by spears, and this sight heavily angered Jupiter. Jupiter lets out a scream, and we see lightning come from the sky, and then Jupiter atop the boy, with the armor dead beside him. She asks the boy what the first rule of survival is, and the boy says don't take a job that offers a suspicious amount of money. The boy cries out for his mother, and he dies. Jupiter says that his way of thinking is flawed, and if you want to be rich, or if you want fame, you can only take dangerous jobs that pay a lot. Jupiter begins dashing from armor to armor, destroying them, and says, stay far from the sorcerers. Because in the end, the sorcerer will take all of the credit, and if you really want to survive, then don't be a mercenary. Jupiter struggles to even light her cigar, and stands there as a horde of armor begins to charge her. She accepts it as her end. But here's a voice telling her to stay still, and we see Lucas charging his sword, while on his horse, killing the armor around Jupiter. This shocks her. It cuts back to Taku and Lucas's conversation, and Taku slaps a soldier and tells him to snap out of it. Don't get intimidated by the monster's size. Taku realizes his ability can cure the soldier's mental state, and he tells Lucas he'll take care of the kill zone, so Lucas will lead the rescue team to save Jupiter's party. Lucas agrees, and it cuts to him riding off while we hear Taku slapping more soldiers. It cuts back to Lucas telling Jupiter to hold on tight, and pulling her onto the horse. While they begin to ride away on the horse, the armor start throwing their spears toward them, but Lucas easily cuts them. Jupiter calls out to Lucas and asks if he's interested in seeing her granddaughter, and that she's a fine young woman. Lucas tells her if she has the energy to make jokes, she should recover her magic. She thinks when the prince is nearby, he's sweet, but when he's gone, Lucas is cold. Jupiter thanks him for saving her, and he says it's just Taku's orders, and he's sorry that he couldn't arrive sooner, while seeing the bodies of her squad members. Jupiter tells him to regret it after they kill the monsters, and that it's been a while since she's been this pissed off. We learn that Taku has restored the kill zone. Taku regrets having lost 4 hero characters, and says he was too confident in his game experience. He explains that in-game, you have to handle the soldier's mentality as well, but in real life, the situations are vastly different, and he didn't expect the horses to get scared too, and now he should consider more variables. Another result of reality he wasn't expecting was the kill zone walls being caught on fire from the cannon shots, and this allows the enemies to flood toward the wall. Taku wanted to end it with just the kill wall, but is glad they got most of the monsters already. He realizes the battlefield is still under his control, and Lucas arrives back with Jupiter. Taku tells her he's glad she survived, and she says she's sorry for having the rookies die in vain, and Taku tells her she didn't know a monster would appear in the air and scare the horses. Jupiter says it is her fault, and she should have been able to react to it, so she will pay it back, and no matter what it costs, she'll take that monster's neck, while staring at the boss. Taku tells her to focus on recovery, because they'll need it soon. We see the enemies rushing in, and Taku yells out that the kill zone is no longer working, and to cease fire. Taku tells Damien to take a break, and now the enemies have finally reached the fort walls, and when the armor can't break the wall, they begin to climb it instead. Taku yells for them to prepare for hand-to-hand combat, and comments on how a war without magic, and a war based on pure physical might is just the start of the war, and we see the soldiers standing above the climbing enemies. Taku orders some men to drop pieces of rubble onto the climbing enemies, and we see it knock some of them off the wall, and some of them die after hitting the floor, but others stand back up. Taku orders the soldiers to push the rest back with spears, and uses this time to reorganize the party to gain a synergy buff. He gains a mage buff of 20%, but at this point, the enemies are beginning to climb over the walls. We see a horde of them emerge over the crenellation, and Taku wonders if the soldiers will be able to fight back, and we see a yellow slash killing an armor, and a beam of light forming. We then see Lucas killing multiple of the enemies that climbed up, and he tells the soldiers he'll kill the enemies, so they just need to stand their ground and stop them. Taku yells out for Lily to activate the next artifact, and we see the artifact is called Haste, and all of the soldiers have increased movement speed. We see the soldiers pushing the enemies back. The soldiers continue to hold the enemies while Lucas kills them, and Taku explains the more enemies Lucas kills, the stronger he becomes, and that he's soloing half of the fort wall. But it's still not enough, because they are losing. Damien says he'll return to the front lines, but Taku says he needs to use his power on the boss, and wonders what to do. That there must be a way to lower injury rate, and protect the soldiers. While he's thinking, he sees a pillar of flame emerge, and he sees Lily cast magic at the enemies. Taku remembers she was a mage, and she asks if he's serious, because she's always been one. He tells her it was great, and that he'll promote her later. She tells him she'd rather just be discharged, and he tells her sure, and he'll give her a bonus too. He grabs onto the back of her wheelchair, and tells her to shoot magic again, and she cries, saying she just wants to retire, and she used all her mana. He begins wheeling her into the enemies, and she begins to scream and cry while casting fire magic. And due to the synergies, her magic is 25% stronger, and we see him wheeling her along the wall, and she's asking to be treated like a human. And just like that, they continued, the soldiers blocked the enemies, Lucas kills them, and Lily burned them with fire. The last armor drops to the floor, and the soldiers are excited that it's over, and Taku yells, telling them it's not over yet, and not to lose focus because there's still one left. They see the armor begins to fly into the air, and starts to form around the giant specter, turning into armor and weapon. The boss lets out a roar, and lands in front of the wall. Taku yells about how this is unfair, and that this shouldn't be the boss of the first level. The giant armor looks at Taku as it towers over the wall, and Taku reminds himself not to be scared and that it's still only a level 25 monster. He orders for the men to fire, and not to save a single shot. We see the cannonballs exploding on the giant armor, but it keeps walking forward through all of the explosions. While being bombarded, it continued walking. Taku tells Lily to activate the next artifact, and we learn it increases magic by 100%, but only to one person. This person will be Jupiter. Jupiter feels the buff, and says it's good, and that she feels like she's young again. Taku orders her to hit the giant armor with everything she's got, and we see Jupiter walk toward it with lightning forming in her hands. We see the lightning begins to rain from the sky as she stretches her hand out, blasting the armor's chest plate. It exposes the giant soul core, and Taku orders Damien to shoot it. We see Damien on a ballista, and he pulls the lever firing a giant bolt at the monster's core. The arrow hits it directly, and we see it begins to crack after being hit. Taku thinks the fight is over, but sees the monster is still alive, and realizes it wasn't enough, but it's too late. The monster begins to swing his sword down onto the wall. Taku realizes if it lands, it'll be over, and yells for Jupiter to hit it again, and she says raising your sword in a thunderstorm is just like asking to be electrocuted. We see small amounts of yellow lightning form around the armor, and then a yellow glare appears, and blue lightning strikes down the armor, but it isn't enough as the monster swings through it. Taku yells for everyone to run, because the sword is coming down. Lucas moves Taku out of the way, and we see the sword crash into the wall, sending some soldiers flying. Taku asks how the wall is, and everyone looks on as the sword is lodged into the wall. The armor begins to crack and disappear, and it crumbles to the floor. Just like that, they finally cleared stage 1's boss. The specters begin to reform, and Lucas yells for Taku to run, but he tells him it's okay. And Taku explains the boss's final attack isn't a physical one, but it will drive you insane. Taku raises his hand, and tells the boss it's the human's land, and to leave, and his skill activates. We see a yellow aura begins to surround the boss, and all that's left are yellow particles from where the boss was, almost like snow. The soldiers watch this and wonder where the boss went, and we see the clouds in the sky begin to split as sunlight pours through them. Taku raises his hand, saying we've won, and we've survived, and we'll continue to win. Taku could watch as the soldiers' eyes changed from fear to joy, and regardless if it was from his skill or not, it felt good, because he yelled with all of his heart. The night after the battle, we see a festival at the central square of the city. Taku raises a glass and says cheers, and tells everyone to drink as much as they want. Because he'll pay for all of it. The festival starts, and everyone appears to be having a good time. There's music, food, arm wrestling, etc. As Taku is watching, Lucas walks up to him and asks if he's okay. Because he hasn't eaten all day, and that his expression isn't that of a commander who has won, and reminds him that he stopped 1,000 enemies, and didn't lose that many of his own. Taku says there weren't any big casualties, but they still lost precious lives. The moment someone dies, regardless of if it was a big or small casualty, everyone is precious, and he knows he can't save everyone. But if he were just a little more careful, they wouldn't have died. Taku mentions how in the tutorial, there wasn't much he could do, but here he had options, and it hurts him because he knows he could have done better. Lucas tells him he did a great job, and comforts him, but reminds him it's a victory festival, and if Taku isn't happy, the morale will go down. So smile, and be happy right now, at least, because that's also a commander's job. Taku smiles, and Ader jump scares him saying it's true. And while it's important to mourn sacrifices, we must take the time to celebrate too. And has brought him a plate of vegetables, because only meat isn't good. And congratulates him on clearing stage 1, and while it was a difficult job, he did well, and to keep up the good work. Taku looks happy to have received the compliment, and Taku begins to eat a tomato, and Ader yells out that he's eating a vegetable because he has no meat. The soldiers begin to apologize and cry, saying they were ignorant, and try to feed him. One of the men yells to bring all of the meat and alcohol, and we see them partying with Taku, and Lily tugs on his sleeve. He looks down at a drunk Lily, and she's bawling, asking for dischargement, please. And he tells her yeah, no. Work more. Some men take her away, and she's crying, saying she wants to quit, and Taku tells them to go tuck her in. Now Damien is drunk, and he's saying the water is beer. Taku tells him it isn't water, and he wonders who gave Damien beer, and he sees Jupiter pouring it into his cup. He asks Jupiter what she's doing, and she replies that he's not a kid, and he's a mercenary, and that she plans to treat him like a grandson. Damien leans on Taku, and tells him that when he's alone, he sees his friend's face, but when he's next to Taku, he feels at ease. Taku explains it's not because he's an important person, but because of his passive skill. Jupiter also says that her magic felt stronger under Taku, and he doesn't know how to tell her it's just a synergy buff. Lucas also says that when he's with Taku, his doubt disappears, and that he's a talented leader. Taku asks if that's why he's always by his side, and Lucas says maybe. Everyone gathers around and brings Taku alcohol, apologizing that the prince, who drank for a week straight, hasn't had any alcohol tonight. And beg him to drink. He drinks and asks if they are happy now, and he orders their drinks to all get filled and yells, let's all drink and die. It cuts to Taku back in his room, and he's opening the chests he's gotten as rewards, and he sees he's obtained a max level item, and it's a pair of gloves. Taku angrily throws the gloves against the wall, and explains that they are a comic relief item called Lucky Strike. The damage dealt is based on a roulette, and it's totally useless. He begrudgingly puts them on and thinks he might get a jackpot when he needs it, and to be optimistic. But this is short-lived as he remembers there are so many other good items he could have gotten instead. It cuts to the next day, and he has a hangover, and so does Lucas. Ader greets them both, and has brought them honey water, and tells them to drink up. Lucas devours it, and Taku decides it's time to prepare for the next stage. He goes to the wall, and we see the giant sword is still there, and asks how long it'll take to repair. The worker tells him it'll take more than 2 weeks, and Taku sees he only has 9 days left until the next stage. And tells Lucas the uninjured soldiers will support wall construction. Taku asks Ader about the reinforcement situation. Ader says a nearby city will send soldiers soon, and the already dispatched soldiers will return tomorrow. Taku tells Ader to keep him updated, and tells Lucas they should go to the dungeon. Lucas asks if he means going back to the lake, and Taku says exactly, but this time we'll be going under the lake with the rest of the party. Because it's time to change from tower defense to dungeon offense. We see the party leaving Taku's office, and we see Lily crying in her wheelchair. I wish she'd stand up for herself. Taku tells Ader to prepare supplies for the expedition, and to bring anything that can shine. The next morning we see them all gathered behind the manor, and Taku forms the gate, and tells them that they'll be going to a kingdom of monsters underneath the lake. And that this is the only way to stop the monsters forever. We see them all at the lake, and Taku tells them to stay alert, because they'll be going deeper. Taku gets a pop-up asking if they want to proceed, and a warning saying that they can't return until the next stopping point. Taku clicks yes, and we see a whirlpool form in the middle of the lake. They head into the lake, and Taku mentions how it's dark. Lucas yells out, asking for him, and Taku tells them all to stay calm and to turn on their lights. We see everyone uses torches, but Lily who has her hands. She screams, and we see some bloodborne type of city. Taku tells them it's the home of the monsters, and they'll have to clear it out piece by piece. Taku explains they can move and breathe because of ancient magic surrounding the city. Lily wonders how there could be such a large city. Lucas tells her to be quiet because someone is coming. Everyone gets ready, and we see a long white-haired person. Taku says it isn't an enemy, and that it's their first time in the dungeon, so it must be a guide NPC. She asks if they are treasure hunters, and tells them the place doesn't have what they want. Taku mentions how he's never seen her before, and wonders if she existed in-game. Taku explains there are about 100 NPCs who live in this kingdom, and one random NPC shows up as a guide, and even though he's played the game 742 times, he's never seen her. Taku tells her they came from the surface, to defeat the monsters. And that the surface world is in pain, because of the monsters. The woman says the nightmare of the kingdom will never end, and nobody can break the nightmare. And many great warriors have tried, but they've all failed. And to return before they get swallowed by the abyss. Taku stares at her, and says he's the Lord of Crossroad, the city that stops monsters. And that's why they've come to the dungeon, and that the doors are locked. He asks her to guide them, and she says sure, and it'll be nice to see if his words are those of courage, or bravado from a plain man. She says follow me, and he asks what to call her. And she says she's forgotten her name, and to call her Mew Myung. Lucas tells Taku they can't follow her, and it'll be a trap. Taku tells him it's fine, and makes a joke about him being a cuckoo clock. They arrive at their spot, and she tells him this is the entrance. Taku says it's the sewer system, and she says it's slippery, so be careful. After 5 minutes, they make it to the first area of the Lake Kingdom. Taku activates a checkpoint portal, and explains that next time they can start straight from here. Lily begs Taku asking to go back home, and he tells her no. Mew Myung tells Taku that she's stopping here, and from here on out, it's his will. Taku thanks her, and she lets out a sigh and says, the nightmare has already swallowed the kingdom. She tells him the deeper he goes, the stronger the monsters will be, and if he still chooses to continue, then to make sure he never turns off his light. And that she hopes his path forward will be blessed. Damien comments on how the darkness is weird, because even with his eyes, he cannot see past it, almost like it's alive. And asks how that woman can walk through it without a torch, but Taku doesn't have the answer. He says they'll meet her again, so they can ask her then. They equipped themselves at the checkpoint, and decided it was time to start the dungeon clear. Taku tells them they won't struggle much, and that it's time to proceed ahead. Taku explains that a dungeon's basic structure is built with rooms and passages, and that you can fight enemies, and find items, or even NPCs. The first room has 14 rats inside of it. We see the rats posturing up at the group. Taku says they are easy, and Lily screams. Taku orders Lucas to take the front, and keep his distance, and focus on the ones that are close. And for Damien to aim for their eyes or necks, and for the mages to only attack the ones that break through the defense. And Taku will watch. We see some rats jump at Lucas, and he instantly kills them. Damien takes out a couple of rats too, and just like that, the room is cleared. Lucas tells him all 13 are dead, and asks if he should collect the gems, and Taku says they aren't worth it. Taku is confused by it only being 13, because the info said 14. We see a rat above him on the ceiling, and the rat jumps down at Taku. Taku screams and punches the rat, and hits a jackpot, sending the rat flying into a wall and turning into a pancake. Taku says it's rare to get above 100. Lucas asks him if he's okay, and asks how he killed the monster in one shot. Taku debates on what to say, and tells him it's called the Prince Punch, and then bullshits that when a royal family member is in an emergency situation, they can activate superpowers. Lucas believes it, and everyone else isn't buying it. They quickly move on to the second room, and Taku says there's something hidden. Damien finds something, and it turns out to be a treasure chest. Taku tells him good job, but it could be a mimic, and is interrupted by a greedy Jupiter running toward the chest. It's revealed not to be a trap, and she comes to her senses and apologizes, saying she can't control herself when she smells money. And gives Taku the chest, and he makes a joke about her having stuff in her pockets. They continue onward, and easily clear the next room full of rats, and finally appear at the boss's room. Taku tells them once they clear this, they'll go home. When they head in, they're overcome by the smell of blood, and they see a giant rat creature eating other rats. It says there's no end to the rats, and that it needs to eradicate the rats, to make the kingdom pristine. Damien is surprised the rat is speaking the human language, and the rat thing hears him speaking and asks if there's another rat alive. The creature is revealed to be a giant rat man named Sewer Manager Peleg, and is level 15. Peleg lets out a scream, and says no matter how many he kills, there are still rats. Taku is confused about why it has a human name, and Peleg leaps toward them, and Taku realizes he needs to say something. Lily screams rats and unleashes flames toward Peleg, and it burns him, which causes him to roll on the floor. Lily yells "Don't come near me," while everyone watches, confused. We see a burned Peleg, and he begins to step back up again, but Jupiter tells him he can stop here, and good night. And we see a lightning bolt pierces Peleg's skull, and then shocks him. As he dies, he says he has to clean out all the rats. Taku is surprised by how quick the boss fight was, and mentions how early bosses have no resistance to magic, and if it were just physical attacks, it would have been difficult. Lily grabs Taku's shoulder, and asks if they are going home now, teary-eyed. He asks if she's scared, and she asks how can she not be with so many rats in the room. They all approach the boss's treasure chest, and Taku tells him to hold on to Jupiter, and we see him lift her away, while she screams. Taku pulls out a rat slicer, and it has a 25% DMG increase to rats. He gives it to Lucas, and says while it's not better than his regular sword, they'll use it. The next thing he finds is a summoning scroll that uses an automatic defense turret, and this was the item he was looking for, and the reason they came here. He tells them it's time to leave, and Lily is happy. After walking past the boss room, they finally entered the inside of the Lake Kingdom, and the second area called Hidden Alleyway. Taku is surprised by how developed it is, and explains the kingdom was the epitome of a magic society, but it's strange there's not a single source of light, or a living being in sight, and that it's covered in darkness, and the dead. We see a lamp post with some rocks underneath it, and Taku approaches it and summons the portal to take them back home, and tells them it's time to leave. We see a person approaching their portal fragments, and says, so he's the last player, and he's made it all the way here. We see the figure pull out a flute, and we see an enormous horde of rats. And the figure's face is revealed to be a mask, and he says, forgive our sins, while standing in the middle of the giant rats, and that everyone is for the Lake Kingdom. Taku tells everyone to rest well, and Jupiter says she doesn't know if she'll be able to after seeing all of that, and asks Taku if he can tell her any more about it. Taku says he doesn't know anything, but he has a hunch, and they should figure things out one by one. Jupiter decides she won't be able to sleep sober, so she'll drink, and Lily says she will too, and they head off. Damien heads back to the temple, and Lucas asks Taku if they'll be going back in to scout for the enemies, and Taku says they already have. And Taku explains that the enemies are going to be the rats, and the monsters first fill up the exploration zone, and then overflow and head to their city. They arrive back at the mansion, and Ader yells that there's a big issue, and that there are no reinforcements. It cuts to the next day, and Ader explains that a war has broken out, and the Empire is currently fighting, and gathering soldiers, so they cannot send any reinforcements. Taku realizes something is off, because the Empire is always at war, and regardless of the time, they are always fighting with neighboring countries, but all of the soldiers are gone coincidentally when he asks for reinforcements. Ader says there are also no new mercenaries, and Taku wonders what to do. And Ader laughs at him. Taku asks him what's funny, and if he knows how to get more soldiers, to which Ader says he does, but it's a pain in the ass. Taku says he doesn't care, that he needs them now and to tell him. Ader says okay, and to follow him. We see them outside with horses, and Lucas asks where he plans to go. Ader says he's going to see the past lord, and they are going to the house of Front Count Cross. Taku explains that a front count is a count that protects the frontier, and because they are tasked with the job of protection, they have the normal authority of a count. So they aren't just nobles, but military commanders who are defending a region. While heading over, Ader explains that ever since people started coming to Crossroad, the front count has ruled the area, and the fort city is named after the count. The road that the Cross family built is called Crossroad, and he's protected it since its creation. Taku asks why he gave up his position, and Ader explains the front count has more authority than the emperor, but he gave up his position and asked for it to be ruled by the empire, which is why Ash is the leader now. Taku wonders why, and Ader says it's a complicated situation and it's better if he heard it in person. We see a manor off in the distance, and once they are at the gate, Ader explains the place was built as a vacation house for the Cross family. And after he resigned, he moved here. The place is extremely overgrown, and Taku asks if someone actually lives here, and they hear a voice yelling, asking who's there. We see an old man with alcohol asking how dare they come in here, and to get away from his house. Ader runs up and tells him it's him, and the man says long time no see. Taku is shocked that the front count is this old man. Ader tells the count who Taku is, and Taku introduces himself to him while being formal, and decides he can't be informal to the count. The count quickly tells him to get out, and this confuses Taku, and the count yells for him to get out. Taku explains that formalities are important, and yells at the man calling him insolent, and goes to remind him of their hierarchy, but the man has a lance and a shield out, and Taku quickly changes his mind. Taku explains if you raise your weapon to the Empire, you're crazy, and the count yells to get out again. Taku says he'll be back next time, and he hopes they can have a proper conversation. The count yells don't come back, and to leave him alone. Taku holds Lucas back like a dog. Taku explains the count never appeared in the game, but he is the father of the best tanker in the game, Evangeline Cross, and she's an SSR character. Taku needs to get on his good side, and he asks Ader how the count will solve the reinforcement problem, and Ader explains that he has a private army. Taku wonders what to do, and Ader suggests that only a drunkard can get close to another drunkard. It cuts to Taku yelling for the count again, and the man comes out saying he must not care for his life, but he sees a wagon beside Taku, and Taku shows him it's a bunch of alcohol. Taku offers the count a drink, but says he doesn't have to. The count says no, and to come in and bring all of it with him. It cuts to Lily having a pleasant dream, but instantly returns back to Taku entering the count's estate. Taku mentions that it reeks of alcohol. They both sit down at a table, and the count mentions it's been a while since he's drank with someone, and even if the house is dirty, the cups must be clean. The man drinks some of the alcohol, and Taku asks how can he appreciate the taste if he just chugs it like that, and the count says, if he wants to compare it to his usual cheap drinks, wouldn't he just chug it the same way? Taku doesn't know if it's right, because he doesn't drink. Taku tries to start a conversation, and the count tells him not to, and just continue drinking, and if he wants to talk about something, he should leave. Taku asks for snacks, and the count hands him a bag of dried fruit he made from the orchard, and shows him it's right outside the window, and says he takes care of it as a hobby. Taku spits out the fruit asking why it's so bitter. The count says, how dare you spit out the fruit I worked so hard to grow, and calls him rude. Then spits it out too. And he says he grew it, but it tastes like trash. He gives it to Taku as a gift, and Taku asks why he's giving it as a gift when he can't eat it. The Count says if he could eat it, he would, and why would he give it to him? Taku is confused, but says it's persuasive. The Count explains that the land here is fertile, and there's no better place to grow fruit. Taku asks what's wrong with the taste then, and the Count says that the issue is being invaded by monsters every other day, and the monsters destroy crops, and kill farmers. And when they die, they leak energy into the ground, and it contaminates the entire area, which will lead to all the crops dying. And this is why Crossroad has no crop fields, and the Count looks regretful as he stares at his alcohol. Taku asks why he's growing crops then, and the Count says everyone has one regret in life, and the orchard is his regret. And that he can't even get drunk when he wants to. Taku asks him if he knows why he's there, and the Count says he warned him not to change the topic, but Taku says to kick him out if he wants, but he will say what he has to. Taku explains that the monsters are moving again, and their size is massive, and the last invasion was 1,000 living armors, and while they were able to stop them, the walls were heavily damaged, and the soldiers aren't competent enough, so they need military support from the Count. The Count tells him that he has no soldiers, because when he gave up his title as the Lord, he let go of the spear and shield, and that his friends all retired too. Taku tells him to recall them, and the Count tells him it's useless, because the land isn't worth protecting, and it's better to evacuate people instead of fighting. Taku is confused about why someone from the Cross family is saying this, and the Count asks him why he's come to Crossroad, and that everything is dying, and there's no future. And the only advice he can offer him, as someone who's spent his life protecting this place, is to just leave, before the curse swallows him whole. We see Taku leaving the manor, and Lucas asks how it went. Taku says he failed, but he got a gift, and that he's planning to return. Taku asks why the Count is like this, and Lucas says he doesn't know either. Taku says it's time to go back to Crossroad, and they have a lot to do. It shows the next stage is over 3,000 rats. The next morning we see the broken pieces of the sword, and one of the union members is saying they'll clean up debris, and then start repairing. Taku tells them don't clean the debris up, just spread it around instead, and use it as a barricade to stop the rats. Taku asks how long it'll take for the wall to be repaired, and the man says 10 days. Taku tells the man he'll take care of the materials and workers, and just try to get it done in a week. The man begins to talk back, and Taku barks at him. Taku mentions again that there will be 3,000 of the dog-sized rats from the sewer. A few days pass, and during the day, Taku helps with repairs, and at night would drink with the Count. They didn't talk, just drank. The wall was steadily being rebuilt, and his liver was steadily breaking down. After 4 days of silently drinking, the Count finally spoke to him. He asks if he is someone he loves, and Taku is confused, so the Count repeats his question. The Count tells him to think hard about it, and Taku reminisces about the past, and how he was alone, and not loved by anyone, and he never loved anyone either. But he started streaming and received love from a viewer, but it was all one-sided, and no matter how hard he thinks, there is nobody. The Count tells him it sounds like he's had a hard life, and Taku asks if that's something someone who drinks alone should say, and asks him if he has someone he loves. The Count looks sad, and says he did, and that the only person he loved was his wife, but she died 3 years ago. She was ripped apart by monsters in the orchard, and they had to hold a funeral with an empty coffin. And he mentions there's a curse on the Lords of Crossroad, and it'll force you to choose between the city, and their precious person, and there's never been an exception. Even his parents, and their parents couldn't avoid it, and nor could he. He recalls how there wasn't any activity from the monsters, and the city was peaceful, but due to this had no income. So he started his own business, and his wife told him to farm south where they are currently. And after word spread of fertile land, immigrants began to flock over, and due to there being only a few monsters, they easily protected themselves. And his wife took leak of their orchard, and doing all the most dangerous parts, and he recalls her feeding him grapes, and that they were sweeter than anything else in this world. He had hoped that he could stop killing the monsters, and he could work in the fields to harvest fruit, and he hoped it to be the case. But it was impossible. It was their second year of farming, they received intel about a horde approaching the city, and he quickly rushed to the city as his wife told him goodbye. And afterward, he went to the city, and they told him the monsters split into groups. One group invaded the farmland, and the others attacked the main city. And he had to choose between his wife, or the thousands of citizens. And he chose the city as all of his ancestors before him had, and after they defeated them, he He came back to the farmland. The fields were ruined, and the people were killed, including his orchard and his wife. While it was his fault, he regrets abandoning his wife, and he mentions how his daughter didn't understand why he chose the city over her mother, and she left him. And in the end, his choice has left him without his wife, and his daughter, and now he's alone. He tells Taku it's just an example, but there will be a point where he will need to choose someone precious to him, and the city. Taku mentions how it doesn't sound like a curse, but an unavoidable fate. The Count says he refuses to pass this job on to his daughter, and Taku understands why he resigned, because he wants his daughter to get out of this cursed land, and to live happily. Taku thinks that the SSR rank tank he wants so bad, is someone the Count doesn't want in the battle. The Count mentions Taku's request to aid him, and tells him he's fought enough and that he wants to quit now. And that he just wants to die in this orchard, not on the fort wall, and his eyes were full of nothing but regret about his wife. The Count tells him this much should explain why he can't help, and he told him this out of gratitude for staying with him, but now it's time to leave, but his final advice is to choose well when the time comes. It cuts to the 5th day of repairs, and there are 2 days left until the stage starts. Taku commends everyone for their good work, and brings them food to eat. The union leader says because of Taku's help, they should be able to complete the repairs in 2 days. Taku says they can finally attach that, and it turns out to be the auto turret from the dungeon clear. He uses the scroll, and he obtains the ability to summon the turret. He gathers some debris and holds a mana core from his previous chest rewards. He chooses on the map where to install the turret, and we watch the debris fly up and build it. We see the tank-like cannon finished assembling, and everyone looks on in awe. Moses drools at the sight of it. Taku thanks everyone for their hard work, and tells them to keep it up. He mentions the mood is nice, and it'll be good if it stays like this. He stops by the blacksmith, and we see Lucas is happy with his new armor, and how it was made using the Spectre Knight's mana core. Taku doesn't like the fact the durability is glass-like, but it has the ability to make him immune for 5 seconds from damage. Lucas cries and tells Taku he'll use it well, and Taku says he should give him gifts more often. The blacksmith thanks him for commissioning him, and Taku says he'll come back often because the equipment is critical. Taku tells Lucas it's time to go to the west side of the city, for an important event. It cuts to the west field, and we see cannon fire going off to remember those who died. They held a funeral for the soldiers who died in the previous stage, and they buried the coffins. There weren't many who died in the last stage, and Taku doesn't know if it was a good or bad thing. It shows a choir singing, and Taku paying respects to the graves. It cuts to night time, and Taku and Lucas are at the graveyard. The Count comments on Taku using most of the city's funds for funerals, and calls it a royal way of using money. The Count says because this is the front line, lives are being taken insanely fast, and there will be a time he can't cover it up with good deeds. Taku asks if he came all this way to say that, or if he ran out of alcohol. The Count says he came here after asking his companions for their opinions, and that he asked if they wanted to protect the city, and they all said they would. Taku screams, and tells him this is the best news he's heard all week. The Count says he doesn't know how much help they will provide, but they are arming themselves right now, and to use them carefully. Taku thanks the Count, and Taku says he's really grateful to him. The Count looks toward the city and says this is all the help he can give, and to take care of the city, and good luck. Taku says he'll do his best, and he'll visit when he needs words of wisdom, and the Count says wisdom, my ass, just bring me alcohol. The Count and Taku banter, then he lets out a sigh and leaves, waving goodbye. Taku wanted to stop him, and even if he is old, he is a commander who has fought on the front line his entire life, so he will be a lot of help this time, but he's lost too many things, so he couldn't stop him. And only watched as he left, because he believed the next time they'd be able to talk more, and he'd give him more advice. But he never thought there wouldn't be a next time. It cuts to 2 days later, and it's the start of the stage. The wall has been repaired, and they have enough materials, a larger army, and his baby, aka the turret. The kill zone has also been prepared, and everything is perfect. We see the masked man standing away from the castle. We see a soldier on horse reporting that the monsters are coming, and we see a horde of rats charging off in the distance. Taku tells everyone to be ready, and to not lower their guard. Taku mentions how even after all of his playthroughs, he's never been this well prepared from the start. The masked man looks at Taku, and Taku wonders who the man is. He asks Lucas if he sees the man, but he's gone. He yells for Damien, asking if he saw him, and Damien says nobody is there. Taku wonders if it's a hallucination, but if it wasn't, then who was that guy? Taku tells himself to calm down, because all he needs to do is stop them. He tells the cannon squad to get ready, and they fire. We see a storm of cannonballs rain down onto the horde of rats, exploding all around them, and blowing them up inside the kill zone. Taku mentions that because of how many rats there are, it makes them group more, so if they keep pouring attacks down, they can get rid of a bunch of them. It cuts to 30 minutes later, and we see that there are already 1,000 rats dead, and at this rate, it won't be a problem, but he notices rats climbing over the kill zone, due to the mountain of rat corpses. One of the walls breaks, and now they are running free through the kill zone. Taku tells everyone to change fire location, and Taku mentions that there's still the debris from the sword, but he watches as the rats dodge the cannonballs and ballista shots. He says at this rate, there will be more than expected reaching the fort wall. We see the turret turn and launch a barrage of bullets at the rats. Taku overlooks the massive explosion from the turret, and drools at how effective it is. But regardless of how good it is, it cannot defend the battlefront alone, and not it's in a reloading sequence. Taku says there are too many, and it's moving faster than he expected, and the sword fragments are doing their part, but it's just a matter of time until the fort wall is reached. And now he realizes hand-to-hand combat is unavoidable. He's surprised by some cannon fire actually hitting the rats, and he watches a barrage of shots actually hit them, and wonders who it is. And he sees it's the Silver Army, and is surprised by how effective they are. We see the Silver Army encouraging all the men, and guiding them as mentors. And they tell Taku don't worry, they'll handle the soldiers. Taku decides to trust in them, and we see their defenses are going smoothly as Taku watches the battlefield. Taku says thanks to the Silver Army, they are able to effectively attack the rats, and if you're curious about what our party is doing, and it shows Lucas commanding the front lines, Damien is shooting, and we see him killing some rats. And while he's a long-distance sniper, it feels like he's less prominent in a broad battle, but it's still meaningful. Lily is in charge of managing the artifacts, and we see her commanding the mages, and she looks at Taku and gives him a wink. But he looks away from her. Next, it shows Jupiter just laying on top of the wall, and Taku stares at her. She begins to make excuses, like her back hurts when gathering mana. He tells her she better does her job properly later, and she raises a glass and says of course. And thanks to everyone's help, but Jupiter, the battlefield is being maintained, and we see another storm of turret blasts shooting the horde of rats. Taku is in love with it. And at this rate, they'll smoothly clear the stage. And he wonders if this will be the first time they clear a stage without big damages, but he spots the man in the mask again. He uses his map function, and can see a hostile NPC is intruding. Taku explains that there are many events that can happen during stages, and NPC trespassing is one of these events. Whether the NPC is from the Lake Kingdom, or an enemy empire, they can ruin the stage. Taku says it isn't time for this, and Ader isn't here, so he can't ask him either. Taku yells at Damien, asking if he can see the man, and he asks if he means the bard. Taku orders him to shoot him, and Damien says he looks like a person, and not a monster. Taku tells him he has to shoot him now, and explains that he's an NPC from Lake Kingdom, with a bard look, and that Damien has to shoot him before he plays his flute. Damien hesitates, and Taku reminds him that he's meant to be his trigger, and if he doesn't want to see more death, he needs to shoot him now. Taku hears the sound of the flute, and realizes it's too late as he looks onto the battlefield. We see the man put the flute down, and the rats stop moving for a second, and then make a full Zerg rush toward the center of the wall. Lucas mentions that's just where they finished construction, and Taku yells for everyone to change their target area and to use all of their firepower. We see the cannons blast, but the defenses aren't keeping up with the Zerg, and their movements are too sudden. They witness one of the rats dive straight into the wall unaliving itself, and he wonders what they are trying to do. The rats continued ramming their heads into the wall. We see more ramming into it. Taku mentions that everyone tried their best, but under such time constraints, the wall isn't perfect, and because they only focused on empty parts, there's still a crack. And that the rats are slamming their bodies into that crack, and are using their claws to bend the metal, and biting the rocks. Simply put, they are digging the fort wall down. Taku looks panicked, and says it might just be him, but at that moment, it looks like the bard laughed. Taku explains that the players call the NPC the Pied Piper, and he orders Damien to shoot again. But Damien hesitates again, and the Pied Piper vanishes, and Taku yells, but notices it's too late. Damien apologizes and cries, saying he can't shoot a person. And Taku says it's to be expected because Damien is a healer at the end of the day, but he will need to get used to shooting humans because there are many humans among their enemies. Taku tells him they'll talk later, and now he has to solve the raticide problem. Taku tells Jupiter she has work to do, and we see she's already ready, because she knew he'd call for her. He tells her to fry them all, and we see her lightning attack the rats. Taku tells Lily to prepare the flamethrower artifacts, and we see them from on the castle wall. It shows the lightning raining down on the rats, and flames hitting them from the sides. Taku mentions how if they all gather in one spot, they can just make it the new kill zone. He makes a goofy face and mocks the rats, but notices the stage information was revealed, and there are 3 boss mobs. Ratman champions, and we hear one of them roaring, and due to their names being revealed, it means they've appeared on the battlefield. We see the 3 giant ratmen, and that their objective is to break through the fort wall. Taku yells for his men to stop them, and we see one of the champions running at the wall, and he tells the men to stop standing there, and they begin to unleash attacks on one of the champions, and if it hits the wall, then it'll collapse. We see the auto turret shoots toward the champion, and it hits him. It dies, but there are still 2 more running at the wall. Taku tells his men not to save ammo, and to shoot. He activates the magic multiplier on Jupiter again, and we see her stretch her arm out, telling the rats to get ready. She calls down a massive lightning storm on the front line, melting countless rats. However, it isn't enough for the champion, due to it being spread out. He calls for Lily to activate the flamethrower, but she tells him it's still on cooldown, and he says he knows. She realizes what he means, and begins screaming while shooting flames. She hits one of the champions, killing it, but there's still one left, and it continues moving forward. Taku yells to stop him, and we see Lucas holding his sword, and throwing it across the battlefield, piercing the champion. He says they still need another shot, and Taku tells Damien to hurry. Damien fires his crossbow, hitting the rat in the eye. Taku thinks it's defeated, but we see the champion continues running toward the wall. The champion prepares its shoulder and dives straight through the wall, and just like that, the wall has been breached. It shows the Count watching the battlefield from atop a hill, and he realizes something is wrong with this invasion. And that it's completely different from when he was a lord. Not only are the numbers massive, the combination too. Instead of a mix of monsters, it was a unified army. He wonders if all of Taku's battles were like this. The Count realizes now why Taku was so desperate for his help, and wonders if he should help or not. He remembers his wife, and he says no, because he's retired. As he heads back, he hears the sound of the champion crashing through the wall, and he convinces himself to just keep going to the orchard, to protect his wife this time. Taku tells his troops to evacuate the citizens, and he tells everyone that they'll go down to the bottom, except a few to stay atop. He tells Lucas to command the combat soldiers, and everyone else will maintain firing atop the wall. He tells Jupiter to fight on her own judgment, but to kill as many as possible, and as soon as she gathers mana to shoot out lightning. He asks Lily what artifacts are available now, and she says only haste. He asks about the flamethrower, and she says it has 10 minutes left. He tells her to use haste on the combat soldiers, and to use the flamethrower as soon as it's charged. He goes to Damien and realizes he's been crying, and that Damien is probably blaming himself, so he flicks his forehead and tells him he's been doing great. And he won't blame him for a small mistake, so don't lose confidence, and his presence alone is a great strength. So he should trust himself. He tells Damien he'll be in charge of the back lines, and to kill the rats that break through their defenses. Taku tells everyone to get ready, and we see the soldiers beside the champion's corpse. A rat climbs over the corpse, and Lucas kills it, showing the rat slicer. And he tells everyone the entrance is narrow and to stay calm and kill them one by one. Taku from above realizes there are more and more rats coming through the hole, and sees them eating a wider opening. The flamethrower is ready now, and Lily begins to scream. When Taku looks over, he sees rats are eating the alchemists, and one of the alchemists asks Lily for help. Taku hits a rat with a prince punch, only dealing 15 damage, but sending it flying. He wonders if they are climbing the wall, and we see that they are. Lily begins to cry and begins to burn the rats. With the artifacts unable to activate due to their deaths, and the injuries in the combat troops, and the cannon teams are losing men too. At this rate, the damage will be uncontrollable. One of the Silver Knights yells out, saying it's the Count. Taku looks over, and sees a shining lance and the Count riding into the battlefield. The Count screams for the rats trying to draw their aggro. Taku realizes it's a large area taunt, and wonders what the Count is doing. Taku yells out to him, asking what he's doing, and tells him he's going to die. The Count's backstory is explained as someone who is always killing something, and he was born in a city to stop monsters, and even when his father died, and he took his position as Count, he killed monsters every day, and his world was simple and clear. This was the case, before his wife came to the city. It shows him asking what she's selling here, and she hands him a flower, and he was baffled by her. He tells her it's the front line, and what they need are weapons, and what use are flowers because they die quickly. And she tells him that's exactly why people need flowers. The fact they die quickly is what makes them beautiful. He couldn't understand her, and he thought she was a spy, and he kept visiting her store every day for proof of her being a spy. He learned a lot about different flowers, and ended up memorizing them, and he still couldn't understand why they were beautiful, and after a year, he proposed to her. It cuts back to the present, and we see all the rats turning to look at him, and he charges straight into the enemy army. It cuts to another flashback, of him seeing his wife holding their daughter, and he just came from a war, so he was bloodied. But he gently held his daughter, Evangeline. His wife asks isn't she pretty, and he couldn't answer because he was confused. She wrapped her tiny hand around his finger, and he still didn't understand how something so small and tiny made his heart choke up like this. Just a few moments ago, he was out killing monsters, and now he's witnessing this, and it confused him. It goes back to the present, and Taku is yelling for everyone to organize quickly, and not to shoot anything, so they don't hit the Count. And to just shoot crossbows or arrows on the other side, away from the Count. He tells Lucas to take the soldiers who can fight outside the wall, and to rescue the Count. Lucas tells him it isn't a rescue, and from this position, they can attack the rats from behind, and they can finish the rats and return with the Count after. Lucas raises his sword and leads the men to battle, and Taku is just repeating to himself, please don't be late. We see the Count is covered in blood, fighting the rats to no end. He doesn't understand himself. While fighting the rats, he didn't understand what he was doing. Even though he promised his wife he'd die beside her, he made the same decision again. And he wonders why he's fighting again for this hellish city. We see him charge deeper into the army, and he blocks them with his shield, but gets sent flying backward. He spent his whole life trying to understand himself, but there's only one thing he knows for sure. As he screams in for another charge at the army, he recalls a flower and his daughter. And that those weak and small things must be protected, and that he's good at killing monsters. He yells out while crying that his daughter is living behind this wall, and that this is the world his daughter lives in, so he will not let a single one of them pass through the wall. We see him getting cut and wounded all over his body, and he screams, but this didn't stop him from fighting. He knew no matter how many orchards he grew, or monsters he killed, his peaceful days are over, and for a man who only knows how to fight, he must swing his lance once again. It shows him slaughtering the rats, and one after another, he repeats to himself, that he just needs one more. And he sat there prepared for his final opponent, but there are no sounds. And he wonders why the monsters aren't attacking anymore, or if he's perhaps already dead. He looks over to see Lucas, and he tells him the monsters are all dead, and the battle is over, so he can rest now. We see the Count is heavily wounded, and drops his lance. We see Taku arriving, and Lucas telling him they were too late. As he walks through the soldiers, he sees the Count on the ground, and Damien healing him. He calls for Damien, and Damien shakes his head. Taku wonders if this potion he has can heal him, but the Count tells him to stop. That it isn't a wound a potion can heal, and to just help him up. We see Taku holding him, and the Count asks if the battle is over, and Taku says yes. The Count mentions the wall was breached, and Taku says yes, but not a single monster made it inside. And the Count says that's good. He notices the heavy atmosphere, and tells everyone not to be so gloomy. And that someone dying shouldn't surprise them at the monster front, and it's just his turn to go. And not to be sad about every death, and to be happy they survived and won. He looks up to Taku and tells him it's the city of graves, and there are a lot of deaths, but even atop the graves, people are still living on, and if the city mourns, then the city will stop. And while it's good to take care of funerals, he needs to make sure to give everyone happiness along with it. Taku tells him he'll do so, because people live on by hope. The Count says it's his time to die because he has no more hope, but to promise him one thing. Taku tells him he'll do his best, and the Count says if his daughter ever comes back, tell her that he's sorry. And to tell her to be free, and to live however she wants. Taku says he'll tell her, and the Count says he's sorry to his wife, because he didn't keep his promise, and that the orchard, their daughter, and everything. But Taku interrupts him and says no, and that he's saved the world, not only once, but throughout his entire life, he's protected every human beyond the battlefront. And that the world is indebted to him. The Count doesn't reply, and instead says he's sorry, and in the end, he did nothing. Taku realizes the man isn't listening to his words, but remembers the dried fruit the Count gave him, and he takes a piece out and feeds the Count. And the Count recalls when his wife fed him the grape, and he mentions how sweet it tasted, and that was his final breath. The bell rang in the distance to signify the invasion was over, and Taku continued to hold on to the Count. He couldn't understand why the Count, who hated his bloodline, and the city, came back at the last moment and fought, and why he died for it. Taku doesn't know why the battlefield made someone sacrifice their life for it, and tells the Count it's heavy, the position of the Lord is too heavy. We see the soldiers surrounding the two, and it displays the stage clear, and displays the MVP, and that the Count has died. It cuts to Taku going back to his manor, and Ader calling out to him, telling him he was worried. Taku calls out to him. Ader says, he's done well this stage too, and it's impressive. Taku grabs onto him and yells for him to tell him, and to stop playing dumb. Why is the difficulty so high, and the tutorial was normally like that, so he brushed it off, and he blames stage 1 on bad luck, but an enemy NPC in stage 2, even hell mode, didn't do that. And he asks again why the game is so difficult, and to tell him why he pretended to help him, then hid these conditions from him. Ader says he might not believe him, but he's helping in his own way, and it's the truth. Taku gets aggressive, and tells him to stop the bullshit, and asks why he didn't tell him. Ader mentions his necklace, and tells him if he clears the next stage, its function will unlock, and when it does, he'll understand everything that's happening right now, so just clear the next stage and figure it out. And he hopes that Taku will understand, and he truly hopes when he learns the truth, he can continue to fight as he has been, because once he knows the truth, he cannot escape. When Taku asks him what he'll need to escape from, Ader says the world itself. It's been 3 days since the end of the second stage, and the atmosphere was heavy, but like always, they began to prepare for the next wave. While heading back to the manor, Taku realizes they have quite a bit of time until the next stage, but he notices a figure outside the manor wall. It turns out to be a girl, and he meets eyes with her, but when he goes to tell Lucas about it, she jumps at him. Stabbing the side of the carriage, Taku screams, and the girl is surprised, because she only wanted to damage the wheel. Lucas asks Taku if he's alright, and he says somewhat. And then Lucas yells at the girl, asking who she is, and that he'll arrest her. Taku is surprised it's just a kid, and Lucas says don't underestimate someone based on their age, and she's been formally trained. And points out that her uniform is of the Royal Academy, and Lucas asks what a student is doing here, and to reveal herself. She asks why they want to know, and calls them old men. This angers both of them, and she tells them this is her house, and she doesn't understand why there are soldiers and people she's never seen before guarding it. And that she's lacking information, so she stopped the carriage to get some. Taku yells, telling her to ask next time, and she says her school taught her if she suspects someone to be an enemy, then to assert dominance. And she apologizes for breaking the carriage by mistake. She asks why they are living in her house, and Lucas says to cut the crap, because it's where the Lord lives, so obviously, it belongs to the Lord. She asks him what he's talking about because her dad is the Lord. They both realize that she's the Count's daughter. And Taku tells her he learned a lot about her from her father, and he's confused because the tanker from the game was a tall beautiful woman, and not a vertically challenged girl. He tells her she's shorter than he thought, and he wonders why it's so different, because, so far everyone else has been the same as in game. Lucas tells him judging based on appearance is rude, and Evangeline looks embarrassed, and asks if he has multiple lives. Taku says he only has one, and she says he should take better care of it, and pulls out a shield. And she says she's changed her mind, and earlier was a mistake, but now it's serious. She rushes toward him, and he says she's similar to the Count. Lucas blocks her lance and tells her to put it down, because Taku is the third prince of the empire. She says they are not only trespassing, but doing identity theft too, and kicks his sword away. And says there's no way the crazy third prince would come here, and Lucas knocks her back. She says he has skills, and Lucas says he's an alumnus of the academy, and that he was second place in his class and tells her his name. And that Taku also graduated from the academy too. She asks if they think she's an idiot who can't tell who her seniors are, and introduces herself as first place in her class, and rushes at them again. Her and Lucas trade blows, and Taku is surprised by how well they both fight, and that it's fun to watch. But at this rate, someone will be hurt, so he tells them both to stop. And that there's been a misunderstanding, so they should talk it out. They ignore him, and he asks if they can't hear him, and he understands they are both focused on their battle. And looks down at his lucky strike and realizes it's his only chance. And even if it's weak, he just needs to break the situation, so he plans to just hit her lightly. He yells Prince Punch, and we see he hits a massive jackpot of 777, and then he looks disgusted at the timing, and we see a rainbow beam form from the sky. He makes a funny face, and says he's unlucky, and we see the damage from the punch on the manor. Lucas is surprised and says it was impressive, and asks how he did it, but then says that's not the issue, and we see Evangeline on the floor. Lucas asks how can be so cruel to a child. They look at each other and ask if she's dead. It cuts to a flashback of Evangeline when she was young, and that her mother would always comfort her when the monsters attacked the city, and her mother would tell her she came to make sure she wasn't crying in fear, and Evangeline always knew that her mother was the one afraid of the monsters. And she asks her why she's scared, when Dad always kills the monsters, and Evangeline realizes her mother wasn't afraid of the monsters, but of losing her husband. And that it's her destiny to fight too. She wakes up in her room and covers herself in her blanket when someone enters the room. Taku pulls up a chair, and he asks him how he's been, and when he doesn't answer, she says it's obvious even if he doesn't answer, and that he's had the best day of his life hunting the monsters. She begins to think to herself that this isn't what she's wanted to say, and Taku tells her that he's not her father. She goes to reach for her weapon, then notices she's in bandages and wonders if she was injured. Taku says he must have hit her too hard, and she recalls what happened and calls him an old man again. She calls him frail and old once more, and he jokes with her. But reintroduces himself as the Prince of the Empire, and she asks why he's spewing nonsense, and says if he's the prince, she's the queen. He holds up a plaque with his family logo, and she's surprised that he's the real deal. She begins to shake and tells him she's his fan, and asks for his autograph. And she reveals that she's his fan because he's insane, and that she wanted to rebel against her father too, and to destroy her reputation and cause problems, and that's why she left home, but after the academy, she was forced to be a model student. Taku mentions how she graduated in 3 years, when it was meant to take 6. And she tells him the most rebellious thing she could do was not contact her father for 3 years. He tells her that's adorable, and she mentions how she's heard Taku's story. That despite his father being the emperor, he disappointed everyone daily, and constantly changed headlines. And describes some of the dumb things he's done to garner his reputation, and tells him he's cool. He makes a joke about how Ash's life wasn't in vain, because he became a role model for being trash. She asks him where her dad is, and asks if he knew about her plan and hid in advance. Taku asks if she really didn't hear the news, and she wonders if something happened. He tells her he's sorry, but her father has died. And it was a few days ago in battle, he sacrificed his life to save everyone, and he died a hero. So Taku recorded all of his accomplishments, and sent them to the Empire, and due to him working all his life, he'll receive a Medal of Honor. He tells her the funeral is in 3 days, and she begins to laugh, saying just when she was going to be a bad daughter, he decides to run away. And she mentions how he always talked about dying while fighting, and that now he can't receive her wrath. Taku says he's sorry, and that he's the current lord and the commander, and that his death is his responsibility, so place the wrath onto him. She asks if he's really the prince, because the prince is meant to not care about others, and calls him insane. He tells her to stop calling him that, and she thanks him for taking care of her. He tells her there are servants outside, so if she needs anything, just ask. As he goes to leave, she apologizes for yesterday, and for the carriage, and for right now. He tells her okay, and to rest well. Ader explains that Evangeline is 16, and that when she appears in game it's a few years later, but some things have happened and caused her to appear earlier. Taku looks at her stats, and is surprised by her agility, even though she's a tank, and he drools over her stats, and her 100% resistance to physical abnormalities. Taku notices she has a trait called Little Miss Clumsy. Taku says it's good she appeared early, but now she has this negative trait. And she's so young, that she should be hanging out with friends, rather than fighting on a battlefield, and he recalls someone calling him Hyung. Ader asks him if he wants to recruit Evangeline, and Taku says he'd be lying if he didn't want to, and having two SSRs at stage, especially both Lucas and Evangeline, would be nice, but he recalls the Count's words, and how he promised him, and that the Count's final plea was for his daughter to live freely. So he has to keep his promise, so he's going to let Evangeline do what she wants. Ader comments on how his face is contradicting his words, and Ader mentions how they should be able to keep her here, and if he loses her, he'll regret it. Taku says he will, but he doesn't want to sacrifice his morals to clear a stage. Ader comments on how it's because he didn't care for morals he was able to clear Hell Sage mode. Taku says that's true, but if he cleared it the same way, then it means he didn't improve. And that he wants to be a better person than yesterday. Ader says that one day that will come back to harm him. Taku tells him he doesn't care, he's not trying to be a saint, but he doesn't want to be a monster. In a world where lives aren't heavy, he wants to be a human. That's all. Taku tells Ader to look after Evangeline, and Ader says he will, but asks him about her lance and shield, and after evaluating them, they both turned out to be SSR ranked items, and now they are too broken to be salvaged. Taku is worried because they were such high ranked items, and Ader says they can make her some new equipment using the cores from the last raid. But Taku is making an expression that he messed up, because he already used the cores. He asks Ader if he gives his Lucky Strike gloves away if it would solve the problem. He calls for Ader to gather the party, because he wants to get mana cores, and then he can just build her some equipment. A few hours later, they gathered at the portal entrance, and Taku asks if everyone has rested well. Lily cries and asks why it's her again, and for Taku to take the new recruits instead. He explains that the new recruits are N-ranked, so while they have good potential, they are too weak for the main party. She shakes him, and he says if there were a character as good as Lily, he would have switched her already. Evangeline approaches them, asking where they are going, and Lily asks who she is. Taku introduces her to them, they all pay respects to her for her father. And she tells them, thanks, but she's fine. She asks where they are going, and Taku says to a dungeon, and she says dungeons don't exist around the city, then, asks if he means the dungeon under the lake, and she says it's just a fairy tale, and some treasure hunters would go to the lake, but nobody ever came back. Taku says they've already come back, and she says that there's a dungeon here that the Cross family didn't know about, and Taku's already been there, and if that's what he's claiming. Taku says her family might have known, and maybe it's just her who didn't. He tells her it doesn't matter if she believes or not, because they're going regardless. She says she wants to go too, and despite her looks, she's a top graduate, and if there's something under the house, she wants to see it. And that both of her parents died at the hands of the monsters from the lake, so she at least has the right to follow them. He thinks to himself that's why he wanted to leave her out of this, because it's what her father wanted. He asks if her feelings have calmed down, and she says, it feels worse to sit still, and it feels better to move around. She asks if he'll take her, and he says yes. Lily looks so happy at the news, and he tells her to stay here, and she screams yes. Taku adds her to the party, and the new synergy gives everyone 20% increase in defense, and their morale doesn't decrease. Ader hands her some equipment, and Taku asks if everyone is ready. He starts to open the portal, and says he'll introduce the party on the way there, and that he'll show her the hidden landmark of her hometown. We see the party inside the dungeon, and they are back in the sewer. Lucas asks why they are here, and Taku says since they have a new party member, it's best to test teamwork in easy spot. Taku explains that after a defense round, the monsters in the dungeon respawn, so it's a good spot to grind for levels and gear, especially for the sub-party. The main party is meant to explore the dungeon and go into deeper areas while fighting bosses, and the sub-party is for farming, and that splitting roles like this is a basic strategy. And even if they are the main party, they have a new member. Evangeline asks Taku how he knew about this place, when she, a Cross family member, didn't. Taku says there's no way the Emperor sent him here without reason, right? And everyone believes him. Taku mentions how he doesn't know the Emperor, and just uses his title for explanations, and he thanks the Emperor. They go down the sewer, and Evangeline asks what's with the darkness. Taku tells her to get used to it, because the dungeon is covered in darkness. He teases her that she can go back if she's scared of the dark, and she says it's nothing. We see they have 4 rooms to clear, and they head down the sewer. The monster, this time, is revealed to be a stone golem, and it's revealed there are 4 of them. Taku says they are an annoying mob, and notices Evangeline is nervous, because she doesn't have a lot of real-life experience. Taku says it's time to test everyone's skills, and we see Evangeline saying she'll go first, and she blocks a golem's punch. We see her skill damage save activates, and she asks if it's normal for it to be so strong. She charges back in with her lance, and uses another skill called damage payback, and Taku is surprised. He explains that she saves the damage of her enemy's hit, and then releases the save damage with her second skill, and there's a limit to how much she can save. He says she's still a cheat, but we see her trip, and Taku is shocked, and calls for everyone to come to help her. We see the rest instantly kill 3 golems, and Evangeline asks for just 1 more. And Taku makes a joke that she's trying to make up for her failure. Taku says since everyone is warmed up, they can head to the second area, and to stay on guard. They arrive at the alleyway, and Taku says it's time to farm mana cores. We see them all resting under the dim light post, and Lucas and Evangeline compete on who can eat faster. Taku hands Damien a gun, and we learn he pulled the item from his last round of chests. He explains that only 1 person can use it, and that it's unstable and hard to aim, and this makes it unpopular. But if Damien uses it, then the problems are meaningless. Damien mentions it's heavy, and Taku thinks that Damien needs to get stronger, because he'll need to carry 5 to 6 of these at a time. He explains that in game a character could only use 1 gun, but in reality, no one can stop him from using multiple guns. Damien thanks him, and Taku asks if everyone is rested, and they head to the next area. There are 4 rooms, and a boss room. They are proceeding cautiously, and Taku comments that the atmosphere is creepy, and just the thought of a house-sized golem appearing is terrifying. And guess what? It happens. Taku screams, and we see it's an elite mob, and there are 2 of them. One of them begins to punch down toward them, and Lucas says he'll stop it. Lucas cuts its hand, and Taku yells for him to be careful of the second one. We see it emerge from his side, and Evangeline says she'll go too. She blocks its punch, and Taku tells Jupiter and Damien to attack the golem Lucas is fighting. Taku says they are both sturdy knights, but if they compare roles, then Lucas is more of a damage tank, while Evangeline is a pure tank. But if it's endurance, then she is stronger. Taku tells her to take a defensive stance, and to stop it, and explains large monsters like golems are strong individually to balance their low numbers. And the one Lucas is fighting has an elite title, so a head-on fight is difficult. Taku tells Lucas to break its stance, and we see him dash in, slicing its leg. It falls to its knees, and he tells Jupiter to blow its armor off. She Pikachus it, and we see a crack form in the middle, and she says it wasn't enough, but Taku says it is. He tells Damien to pull the trigger, and he shoots the gun at the monster. The kickback of the gun makes him fall, and Taku catches him. Damien asks what happened, and he looks over to see the golem has a giant hole in his chest. Lucas says it was a tough opponent, and Taku explains elites are much stronger than a normal mob, and Taku says they can anticipate each fight will be an elite, so just treat them like boss fights. Evangeline asks if they are taking a break, because she isn't finished. Taku forgets she was fighting, and tells everyone to help her. Taku explains that continuing was easy. Anytime an alleyway seemed wider, steam engine golems appeared, and after a bit, they became easier to fight. He also got tent-tied by a mimic, and he wonders if they'll believe he fell into it on purpose, and everyone just laughs at him. We see Lucas climbing a wall, and he mentions that they can't go off the path because of the darkness, and Damien mentions that the buildings aren't an option either, because they are all blocked, and Jupiter says, they've also been sealed magically. Damien asks if the people inside did it to protect themselves from the outside, and Taku explains it was done from the outside, and it was to stop whatever was in the house from coming out. And Damien asks what's inside. Taku tells him he doesn't know, and they should continue. We see they have cleared 3 normal rooms, and have 1 more left, and the boss room. The next room is a giant plaza, with a fountain. Taku tells everyone to stay alert, and Evangeline points out all the water is dried up, but she can see a statue on the fountain. Taku wonders if it's a statue of the king, but wonders why the other 2 statues' heads are gone. Damien tells Taku he sees the light, and Taku tells everyone to approach with caution. And Taku says in a city of monsters, the only thing scarier than a monster is a person, because anyone who lives here isn't normal. He wonders if it's an enemy NPC or a helpful one, and that if they let their guard down, they will die. We learn the flame is fragments from defeated golems, and they see a figure. The person says since they are here, it seems like they are exploring pretty seriously, and we see it's Myung. Subscribe for more videos like this, leave a like or a comment to help the channel out. Thanks for watching.